following podcast contains spoilers and rude words. We watch the thing. We watch the thing. Hello everybody and welcome back to We Watched a Thing for another week of fun. This week I've got a great guest and an interesting movie to chat about. I was looking forward to this one for a while. Please welcome Mr. David Rosen from Piecing It Together. How you doing, mate?
I am great, and I'm excited to talk about this movie. That's what it is. It's a movie.
Yeah. This was really highly anticipated for me, and I think it was for you too. When I reached out to you a couple of months ago to say, hey, what do you want to hop on? This almost immediately you jumped back with. Were you looking forward to this one?
I was so cautiously optimistic, because there's so many things about this movie that I was excited about, but I thought the trailers stunk. And so that's why I was I really didn't know what to expect. But I mean, Brad Pitt, awesome. Aaron Taylor Johnson, Tyree Henry. David Leitch, I mean, not batting 1,000 when it comes to movies he's directed, but movies that he's involved with. Overall, so many, exciting, fun action things. I was definitely excited and hopeful.
Yeah. So we are, of course, talking about Bullet Train, which is a 2022 American action comedy film starring, as you said, Brad Pitt. It's directed by David Leitch, based on a screenplay by Zak Olkewicz that's adapted from a Japanese manga. And let me ask you this, what is it about, David?
Oh, boy. It's about a bullet train that is speeding around, and there's a whole bunch of hitmen, assassins, if you will, on this train that are all kind of after the same thing, but they also have their own histories with one another, and they end up getting in bloody battles with each other on this train, and all kinds of hell breaks loose, and there's a lot of quippiness throughout.
Yeah. Before we get into what we thought of the movie, I just have to ask you this, because I know that you saw this with your dad, right?
Yeah.
Yeah? Did he like this movie? What were his thoughts walking out of it?
He felt roughly the same as me, which is to say he turned to me about 20 minutes into the movie and gave me a big thumbs down. And then it kind of redeemed itself as it went along. And we both felt it got so much better in the second half. Yeah. And that doesn't really happen a lot. Usually if a movie is, that bad in the first 20, 30 minutes, it's you're kind of just waiting for it to end. But this movie really does get pretty fun as it goes along.
Well, that's good. I think it sounds like we maybe had a bit of a similar experience, though. But I have to say, I think mine was a little more negative. Like I said, I don't watch trailers, so I hadn't seen any trailers for this film. But, I knew the premise, I knew the cast. I was like, yes, this sounds excellent. I was really excited walking in there. Yeah. And I think the thing for me is, I don't think this film ever gets as fun as the film thinks it is.
Sure.
I think that this film really thinks it's having a lot of fun, but for the most part, a lot of that falls flat for me. And there are some really great action sequences. And I agree that in the back half, when things start to get truly outrageous, that's when, for me, it works better. Yeah. But I'm kind of middling on this film in the end, I think.
Absolutely middling. I forget if you do a star rating by the end of this conversation. 10, yeah, okay. So I'll save that for later. But let's just say middling. Yeah, for sure. So.
Yeah. Well, let's get straight into it then. Brad Pitt, excellent in the film, I think. I think that most of the cast actually are really, really great. Tyree Henry is a standout for me, and I think the chemistry between him and Aaron Taylor Johnson worked especially well. Mm-hmm. Your thoughts on the cast? Yeah,
I mean, I would say the biggest compliment you could give this movie is that it really does seem like everyone's having a good time making it, and all these actors are having a blast, and it definitely leans too heavily on the whole, winking at the camera and everybody being so proud of themselves for, making such a hilarious movie, quote unquote, but they're clearly having a good time, and that does come off the screen a little bit. So that at least, that's where most of the fun comes from, I think.
Yeah. This might sound a little bit silly because he's obviously the lead. I was surprised that there's quite a few large chunks of this film where Brad Pitt's not in it. In fact, the first half hour where you said that both you and your dad were a little bit like, "Ooh, I don't know about this." I wonder if part of that is because there's that first half hour he's maybe in about 10 minutes of.
Right.
And I think that for a film like this, yes, it is very clearly an ensemble, and there is a lot of that going on. I still feel like you need one central thread, because especially in that half hour, I kind of felt like it was, this is going to make me sound dumb, I felt like it was a little bit hard to follow at times, because there are so many threads that, you know, at a certain point they start to connect quite loosely even. But that first half hour, I was like, whoa, hang on, wait, so what is this flashback now? Did you have the same experience, or is that just me because I'd had a few drinks?
No, that is absolutely, I think, everybody's experience, because, I think that they're just trying to do too much in this movie. I mean, yes, all of the characters and their backstories do come together by the end, and, you know, good on the writer and on David Leitch for making it all work out, you know, when it comes down to it. But this movie at 2 hours and 10 minutes, it's way too long. It didn't need quite as much of all of these characters and their little, like, you know, character beats and backstories and histories and all that stuff. None of it necessarily pays off enough for it all to be there. It feels like you've got the Blu-ray deleted scenes like still stitched into the movie, you know?
Yeah, I agree. As much as I enjoyed the stuff with the snake, for me, the Hornet doesn't need to be in this film. She's in one scene. Yeah. And, you know, like you said, at 2 hours, 10 minutes, I did feel the runtime of this film. And I think for a film that is supposed to be a fun, mindless action, not only is supposed to be, that's, like you said, it's almost winking at the camera saying, look at how outrageous we are. I just don't think this runtime is warranted.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jaja Beetz is great, but her character is completely unnecessary here. Yeah. I don't know about Joey King either. You know, like even though that does become a big central drive of the plot towards the end of the movie, her whole trying to get back at her dad thing, like that still also feels like kind of like they spend way too much time on the mystery of her character, on the not knowing what her plan is. Whereas, you know, I almost would have liked a cartoonishly evil, like Joey King, like just showing up and like telling her plan immediately, and then let's get on with the movie, you know? Yeah,
same. Yeah. On cast, again, I've not seen any of the trailers, so I was not expecting any of the cameos that popped up in the film. Did you know, for example, that Channing Tatum and Ryan Reynolds were in this film at some point?
So I certainly knew Sandra Bullock was going to be in it, because they did spoil that in the second trailer.
Okay.
Yeah, they showed these two trailers like every time I went to the movies over the last 6 months. So that was part of why I kind of had fatigue on that trailer. But no, not to Channing Tatum, which was definitely a fun little reveal. And plus with The Lost City earlier this year that the three of them were in together, that like was like a fun little callback. And that movie is surprisingly fun. I had a good time with The Lost City. Also not great, but I would say better than Bullet Train. You know, I was not expecting the little Ryan Reynolds guest appearance, but, you know, that's like he literally could have done that on a webcam. Like, that's how short
because he didn't even speak, did he?
No, there was no line or anything. It was just, you know, oh, Ryan Reynolds is the guy that Brad Pitt had to step in for. So that was a funny little bit. It feels like any of these kind of movies Ryan Reynolds can show up for like, you know, 30 minutes and get his pay. So
yeah, that
was good. As long as we're talking about cameos, though, you know, my favorite of the bunch that I didn't know was going to happen, the White Death turned out to be, and we might as well just say it since we're talking about all the cameos here. It was Michael Shannon, and there was a moment, I tweeted about this the other day, actually, partially inspired by having just seen Bullet Train, but there was a moment like 5 years ago or something where Michael Shannon was in every movie, and every movie he was in, he was the best part of the movie. Yeah. This is like a callback to that moment 5 years ago. Like, he was so funny in this and like so ridiculous as this like Russian guy who came up through the ranks of like the Yakuza or whatever, like all kinds of like crazy shit. And he's just such a ridiculous character. And Michael Shannon has such intensity to him that it was really fun to see him do this.
He plays a great bad guy, and it was awesome to see him, like you say, have that more comedic spin on it. But I think what really worked for me about him is that he was one of the few people that I felt wasn't doing it with a wink at the camera. He wasn't going, look how outrageous I am as a character. He was playing it almost very straight, and that's what made it so funny. And I feel like Brad Pitt actually was doing the same thing, which was why he worked very well for me in this film.
Absolutely. And Aaron Taylor Johnson too, I feel like.
Absolutely true. Yeah.
I feel like it's pretty much the rest of the cast that is like, totally I don't know, playing Halloween dress up almost and like, like check this out, guys,
Yeah. Where were you on the running gags, for example, the Thomas the Tank Engine stuff, which I actually found very funny.
Yeah, it was definitely, I mean, the theater I was in was all laughing at that. So, I mean, it certainly worked. It also is part of that running time of like, do we need the 17th Thomas the Tank Engine monologue? I don't know. It was a little bit much. Although Brian Tyree Henry delivering that in that like crazy thick British accent that, I don't know where he came up with that accent, but that definitely works at least. It was funny.
Yeah. See, for me, it was those little personality traits. Like, for example, the movie was at its best for me when it really played into that gag about Brad Pitt's luck. Like, the funniest action scene in the whole film for me was that first time he tries to get off the train and the Mexican guy comes on, they have that fight, he throws the knife at him and it just bounces off the suitcase and stabs himself.
Oh, yeah.
I just wish that the movie had leaned into more of those kind of moments where the comedy was kind of natural and related to the characteristics of these people as opposed to just, I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like it wanted to be goofy fun, but also like Tarantino, Guy Ritchie, Joe Carnahan kind of thing also at the same time. And it's like having its cake and eat it too. Like it should have been more of just a live action cartoon almost.
I agree. It almost didn't know whether it wanted to be Fast and Furious or Snatch. And it's like, so it ends up in this weird kind of middle ground where only half of it ends up landing. When it really leans into one of those two things, it works. But I don't think it does that quite enough.
Yeah, absolutely.
I got to ask you this, because you're a big music guy. For those who don't know, you're a composer. You've composed for, short films and stuff. I usually really notice score, and I kind of get ragged on this show for a bit because I always bring it up. I really did not notice the score in this film at all. I mean, there's the few moments where there's bits of soundtrack where we have a couple of songs that play, and I thought for the most part they worked. Did you notice the score at all in this film?
I didn't notice the score at all, actually, now that you mention it. Like, I was going to say, like, as soon as you started bringing that up, like, it was mostly songs. Yeah. And I think there were some score, like, kind of, like, bridging it together, but it was mostly, like... And again, this like kind of brings you back to, Guy Ritchie or Tarantino or something like that. It's
exactly.
Like, these like digging in the crates kind of record picks that like, are used semi-ironically, but also just because they sound cool, and it's more like just like finding those kinds of songs to soundtrack the thing. And that kind of adds to that whole, winking at the audience kind of thing that it was going for.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I kind of feel a little bit like we are in an age at the moment where that has been overdone a little bit. Like when you think back to, you brought up Tarantino, perfect example. You look at Pulp Fiction or Reservoir Dogs, obviously, I think is the best example of the soundtrack, really. And it's almost a character in that film because of the way it's done through the radio station and stuff.
Yeah.
And I think ever since, the first... And I actually liked it in this film, but Guardians of the Galaxy was another one where it was tied in through that character of the mixtape and stuff. But since that film, I think it's been overdone in action a little bit. Yeah. Obviously, we got, right after Guardians, there was Suicide Squad, which famously just crammed in whatever songs it could. Yeah. like I said, I don't remember the score in this. I kind of probably only really remember 2 of the songs that played as well. And apart from that, I feel like they're just kind of there.
Sure.
So I can't say I loved the soundtrack for this film.
Yeah, I would agree with that. None of those songs like specifically stood out to me. It was just going for a vibe of just like a really cool vibe, which I don't know if that necessarily matches the setting. I guess the was it Staying Alive?
That was in Japanese. I remember that
the
one.
Japanese Staying Alive. So that matched, like that fit, and that was also in the trailer, by the way. But
right, yep.
Which I don't like that. I don't like when they use the song in the trailer and then it's like it shows up in the first scene in the movie and it's like, oh, we're back to the trailer again, So at least like bury it later in the movie or something.
Yeah. Well, okay, so you just brought up the vibe and the setting and the aesthetic and stuff. I'd love to talk about that because I think part of the reason I was really excited for this film is because I love a film that goes for something stylistically. And I think I was expecting a little bit more of that from this film, to have kind of a unique style. That it's a colorful film to an extent, but I think I was expecting really over the top. Like I almost, I guess, pictured like, and this isn't a great film, but Harley Quinn Birds of Prey, which obviously goes very much into its aesthetic.
Yeah.
Did you like the overall look of this film?
I mean, I didn't think it was bad necessarily, but I think that's also inherently a problem with setting an entire film on a train. Like, there's not that much room to, like, try different things. Anytime they exit the train, it looks really cool. All the neon colors and everything kind of brought you back to Atomic Blonde a little bit, or maybe John Wick 3 or, something like that. But yeah, once they're on the train, which is of that 2 hours and 10 minutes, probably like an hour and 45 minutes of the movie.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
It's a train, that's basically what it is. You're on a train the whole time.
Yeah, you're right. I think they did a pretty good job of, they mentioned early on there's, I think, 16 carriages, and completely unlike a real train, every carriage does kind of have its own look, which is kind of cool. And they do use a lot of colored lighting and stuff. But I think you're probably right. I didn't really make that connection, but given that it is all really in this one location, it does really limit the kind of style that I think the film can and probably should have had. Yeah.
It would have been fun if they had leaned more into that whole idea of each of the cars in the train having like a different look to them. It kind of brings me back to the new Doctor Strange movie, which, much love to Sam Raimi, but that we're going to these different multiverses and it's like, in this one, green is red and red is green. Like, use some imagination, use something different, At least we got Pizza Papa, but like, there's... They should have gone a little crazier with the imagination of what those different multiverses could have been. And the same here with the cars. They could have been like totally like themed out or something, almost like video game levels.
Yeah, well, I guess that's the thing. I guess, when I talk about that style and aesthetic, I actually am one of the few people in the world who does not like this film, but Scott Pilgrim vs. the World is a perfect example where it really leans into what it's doing. And I think this could have done that, it's based on a manga, like we could really play with some kind of visual flares, and I guess I just would have liked a little bit more of that.
Yeah, and you should give Scott Pilgrim vs. the World another chance, by the way. It's amazing.
I think, not to get off track, but that's what we do here on this show.
Sure.
I think the thing for me was I was such a fan of the graphic novels.
Okay.
And so I was really, really disappointed because I think while it is going for something stylistically, it's not really linked to its origin. And just the story for me, I know it's hard when you're condensing 6 books into one film, but for me, they focused on the wrong part of the story.
Interesting. Okay.
But,
I could see how that would be disappointing. Yeah. Cause I came into it like not knowing anything about it. So
yeah. Just before we move on from the setting, we're probably not the right guys to really talk about this, but I have to ask, there was a lot of controversy around the film and its whitewashing of the characters, being based on, a Japanese story and still set in Japan, but with very, very few Japanese characters.
Yeah.
Is that something that you noticed?
I mean, it does seem like they tried to make it a pretty multicultural story, but of course our main hero is Brad Pitt, so it's kind of a moot point at that point. But, I don't know. There's definitely a variety to the characters and the actors. And so, I mean, I feel like they at least tried,
Yeah, I agree. And, the writer of the original story came out saying that, he sees it as a very universal story. And, it's a manga. These characters are, I guess, kind of whatever you imagine them to be. So, it wasn't something that I noticed. And I thought the cast was, for the most part, so good that it didn't bother me.
Yeah. It's kind of funny. Like, we want our unhinged killers to be, portrayed by the right, people. Like, it's kind of a funny thing to put your stamp on,
Speaking of unhinged killers, apart from Brad Pitt's kind of whole luck gimmick, I really loved that he didn't take a gun with him on the train. Mm-hmm. He wasn't, and he was all the joke that I found the funniest in the film was when he was talking to, who was it? When he was talking to Joey King at the end, he's like, I've got some books that you should read. Maybe, like growing up with, behavior, personality disorders. Like, just, I loved that whole shtick. That was very funny.
Yeah, he's on his own like soul searching journey, and that's a fun bit, and it's kind of like a throwback. I feel like we did more of those things like in the '90s almost. Like you could go to Pulp Fiction, even it was Samuel L. Jackson's character, like, or you could go to like a straight up comedy, like a Analyze This or something, like a mom guy going to therapy. It's kind of weird that we're like back to that, but it's pretty funny though.
Yeah.
I would say that like, and I brought up The Lost Kingdom earlier as well, another movie that, these actors were in, or The Lost City, I'm sorry. Both of these movies, they are kind of throwbacks to that kind of just fun action movie that isn't really Marvel-ified too much. They're still quippy, which I guess, kind of brings you into the whole Marvel thing, but it is its own story, and it does feel completely closed off, and it doesn't feel like we're setting up a universe or anything. It just seems like we're just trying to have a quick little fun, like, over-the-top action movie, and that's one of the things I liked about it. I wouldn't really expect it to go. Now, I don't know how the manga or whatever, like if there's like many other books that they could go adapting if this was a hit, which it doesn't look like it's going to be. But, it still feels like a self-contained thing, which is a nice thing to see nowadays because most things aren't that,
Absolutely. I mean, even things in this genre now, like I think honestly the closest thing to this, and some people are probably going to get mad at me for this comparison, but I think the closest thing is Fast and Furious, like just that over the top outrageous action, and that has become so much of a soap opera by this point. But you're right, it's so nice and refreshing to go and see a film that's it's a contained story. I think it's a little bit ambitious and its runtime is a little bit long, but that was really nice.
Absolutely. And one of the reasons also that I'm kind of like almost going easy on this movie, even though it's not that good necessarily, is there's a lot of traits that it shares with a lot of these like Netflix action movies like Red Notice and stuff like that. And those movies are just abysmal, they're so bad. And like they're so clearly, every frame of them is to set up these like shared universes that nobody wants, nobody asked for. And they're just, we're talking about all the winking to the camera and where it's just, celebrities just being on a green screen and winking. And like, that's all those movies are. And this, at least there feels like there's the slightest bit of substance there. And it's not big praise on my part, but it just feels like better than what we've been getting a lot of in this particular genre lately.
I agree. I definitely think this is an elevated version of what we typically see in this genre. I think that the dialogue, for starters, is better than what we usually get. I wouldn't go so far as to say the screenplay is better. Like, I think that, narratively, I still think there's some problems. I think particularly I mean, it's obvious. With any movie like this, you have to suspend disbelief, and that's absolutely fine. If you're the kind of person who can't just watch a silly action scene and have fun with that, I think the problem is you more than the movie, typically. And, you know, it's restrained in some ways. They're not flying any cars into space, and they're not, you know, they're not blowing up all of Prague, like in The Grey Man recently, but you know,
I'm impressed you remember a single scene from The Grey Man. It's all gone already. So.
Well, let's talk about the action scenes in this film just before we go. Where were you on the action in the film, the choreography, the violence, all of that?
I mean, generally speaking, it was a bit of a mixed bag because not all of them really stood out too well. Yeah. But I mean, there was some good stuff though. Like the whole like ending sequence was very fun, and you know, just the big over the top stuff. The part you mentioned earlier with is it Bad Bunny, his character, that was good. All the stuff with Michael Shannon was good. And just, you know, Aaron Taylor Johnson and Brian Tyree Henry, the two of them just really sold all of their action beats, whether it was fighting with Brad Pitt or fighting with other people on the train. Like they were just really into it, and that kind of helps to sell everything. So yeah, I think there's, you know, there's more good than bad when it comes to the action sequences, and that's really what you're watching this movie for.
100%. I mean, there are a lot of action sequences in this film, like to varying degrees. Some of them are much more small and intimate. Some of them are giant and over the top. But I would say that you're probably not going more than 10 minutes in this film without some kind of action set piece, even if it's small. And I think for the most part, they work. For me, I actually prefer the smaller, intimate ones, which surprised me because I'm here for over the top, you know, completely ridiculous action. But like I said, I don't think this film ever really got to that point where it was as fun as it thought it was being. I don't think it was ever as over the top as I was hoping for. So I actually really preferred those smaller, you know, like when it is just Brad Pitt and Aaron Taylor Johnson and Brian Tyree Henry, like just the three of them kind of, or like I mentioned earlier, that scene with him and the guy in the suitcase where he stabs himself. Like for me, those sequences actually worked much better. But yeah, nothing to complain about with the action. I think it was all shot very well. I think the choreography was well. There was never any time where I found it hard to follow the action, which is typically a problem with action films.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And I felt kind of the same way with Atomic Blonde, actually, speaking of David Leitch and other films. Like, you know, like whenever it was action, great. Very, you know, a lot of fun, a lot of style, a lot of great choreography. Rest of the story, you know, I could do without, you know. But the action was great. Hobbs and Shaw was definitely a misstep, but the less we talk about that one, you know. But,
oh my God, that is literally one of the worst movies I've seen in the last 10 years.
Yeah, and I love the Fast and Furious movies. They're so stupid and so fun and ridiculous, but that was a huge misstep for everyone involved. You know,
I actually really liked Atomic Blonde. I need to revisit that because I only saw it the once, but I remember really having fun with that film.
Yeah, like I said, anytime action was happening, it was great. It was the rest of it just kind of lost me a little bit, but yeah, definitely the action, and I think they're making a straight up sequel, like with David Leitch and everything.
Oh, cool.
So that'll be cool if that comes out sometime soon. And of course Deadpool 2, you know, that's, you know, it's Deadpool. What are you gonna do? You know, it's fun.
Yeah. So all in all, how are you scoring Bullet Train out of 10?
I feel like 5 is too low.
Yeah.
But 6 is too high. Like, like I don't know. I think I'm gonna go with a 6, but you know, I'm just feeling generous. You know,
I had the exact same argument in my head, and I also landed on a 6 because. Yeah, I agree. I feel like 5 is too low for what this is. Like, this is not a bad movie by any stretch. It's just, and I didn't walk out of there regretting my time at the cinema. Like, I had a fun time. It was date night. My wife enjoyed this more than I did even. But yeah, so I'm landing on a 6. I think it's a totally fine movie. I don't know that you need to go see this at the cinemas. But it's worth a watch at some point. If you like an action movie, chances are you'll like this to some extent, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. There's enough fun to be had.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining me, mate. Can you tell everybody about Piecing It Together or any of the other things that you do and where they can find you?
Sure. Well, Piecing It Together is a podcast about movies and the movies that inspired them. We'll be covering Bullet Train coming up soon, and we'll talk about, I'm sure, Carnahan and Tarantino and Matthew Vaughn and all those things, Guy Ritchie. So we get into all the movies that inspired current movies, and you can find it at piecingpod.com or on all the socials at piecingpod. And I actually have a new single coming out. You said earlier, I am a composer, and it's under my name, David Rosen. The single's called Antiviral. There's a music video as well. You can find that and all my other music at bydavidrosen.com.
Awesome. Nice. I'll check that out for sure. I'd highly recommend Piecing It Together. It's a great podcast. If you really love film, which I'm sure you do if you're listening to this, unless you just like hearing me talk nonsense. It's really cool. Like you say, going back at those puzzle pieces of, what various films were kind of inspired by. It's really cool. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
No worries. All right, next week I will be joined by Damien Robb of the wonderful Scaredy Boys podcast. We're going to be finally getting to Nope, which I know that you've already done on your show. That came out, about a month ago in the States?
Yeah.
Yep.
And I love Nope, so I'm excited to hear what you guys thought.
Yeah, well, we are finally getting it here this week, so very looking forward to that. And the week after that, I'll be chatting Prey with Sam Hurley from Movie Reviews in 20 Qs, if all goes to plan. So, all right. In the meantime, if you want to get in touch with me, you can do that at wewatchedathing.com or wewatchedathing@gmail.com. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, all under the handle at wewatchedathing. If you want to help support the show, you can do that at patreon.com/wewatchedathing, and I'll catch you next week.